Minister, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Can I thank the organisers for what I see as a singular honour to be asked to speak at this forum, which is a very important part of Ireland's kind of social, political and cultural life and has been for many years. I'm going to address the issue of why I think the health service is dysfunctional, not that every aspect of it is dysfunctional, and I'm obviously coming at it from the perspective of somebody who works in emergency medicine and has been a consultant for over 20 years. So inevitably what I say is focused on what I see on a day-to-day basis, day-to-day level. But I think that's important for us to look at because, 1.2 million patients attend emergency departments every year. So we're here to celebrate the achievements of Patrick MacGill. And Patrick MacGill was remarkable for many reasons, not least the fact that he died just short of his 74th birthday. Given that in the year of his birth in 1899 that the average life expectancy for an Irish male would have been 50, the fact that he actually exceeded that by so much is remarkable, particularly given the difficulties he endured in his life, both wartime service and his work in some of the most physical aspects of employment that you could imagine. I think it's important to appreciate that if you're born today as a male in Ireland, your life expectancy is now 89.7 years. But let's imagine that Patrick, or somebody like Patrick, is say 79, not even the full 89, 79, and let's talk about how he might interact with the health service in 2016 and what his experience might be. So, as it happens, Patrick has becoming, as is not unusual at that age, has been declining and his health has been worsening over the past 6 to 9 months. But over the last week or so, it's got particularly bad, and he eventually decides that he needs to do something about it. And he makes an appointment to see his GP. His GP can't see him for a couple of days because of the pressures on that service. GP sees him, examines him, and she feels that he requires hospital admission. So she calls an ambulance, feeling that he's not in a position to drive himself to hospital, nor should he, nor are any of his relatives. So she calls an ambulance. The ambulance takes some time to get there because it has time targets to meet and its priority is addressing those time targets. So he eventually gets to the local emergency department where he joins a queue of ambulances. And if you look at these pictures, they're Irish pictures, then there are a number of ambulances trying to offload their patients simultaneously into a department that's full of admitted hospital inpatients. They're the people on trolleys in emergency departments. These are Irish pictures as well. He eventually gets into the emergency department. He eventually gets into a space, may not be a cubicle, but gets into a space where he can be assessed and treated and eventually has the medical treatment that he requires. However, this process is obviously delayed. A decision is made that he requires hospital admission. He waits 20 hours on a trolley, languishing on a trolley, among a load of other warehouse patients in the emergency department awaiting a hospital bed. He eventually gets a hospital bed and he has a battery of investigations, is seen by a number of doctors, other members of the multidisciplinary team, and the conclusion is that Patrick has a condition that he's not going to recover from, and the thoughts of longer-term care begin to be entertained. So he survives his acute illness, but he becomes one of these people unfortunately referred to as a bed blocker. And he waits while the fair deal process wends its way along, and eventually a nursing home is found for him and he is transferred to this nursing home. Over the final 6 months of his life, he has 4 admissions to the local emergency department, all brought by ambulance. 2 of them are because he's had unwitnessed falls. So he goes to the emergency department, has X-rays, is examined, assessed, and a decision is made that there's no fracture or nothing that needs intervention, goes back to the nursing home. On a third occasion, he presents septic with an infection, spends some more time in hospital. Because of his second hospital admission and his declining state of health, a decision is made that he would not be actively resuscitated should he have a cardiac arrest. He goes back to the nursing home, but unfortunately and inevitably, in spite of the fact that his death is anticipated, because he starts to deteriorate again, in fear of HICWA, and I'll come back to this issue in a minute, he is put in a blue light ambulance and sent back to the emergency department. Thankfully, the sister in charge realises that Patrick is dying, manages to shift a load of patients that are taking up cubicle spaces out of them so he can be moved into the quietest part of the department. His family get to his bedside and are with him before he dies, and he ultimately dies. So to me, this is what dysfunctionality looks like. This is the real-world experience of dysfunctionality. So this isn't just costly in human terms, and it is very costly in human terms. This is also financially very costly. The fact that we don't provide the care that we would wish to provide, and there are so many delays built into it that outcomes are bad. And some examples of that. We know there's an increased mortality in situations of emergency department crowding. That's a fact. We know there are poorer medical outcomes from delayed or unreceived interventions. We know that if you're over 75 and you wait in a trolley for more than 12 hours, your hospital stay will be lengthened, but also your chances of returning to the existence you had prior to the incident diminish. We know that this precipitates institutional care even in people who shouldn't end up in institutional care. That in turn provokes multiple return visits to the hospital, usually the emergency department, and usually ends up resulting in the patient dying in an emergency department or in a hospital rather than in the place that they would call home. Now, my fellow speakers spoke about our health spend. These are the figures from 2013. The 2014 figures have just been released, but the 2013 figures show that we spend 10.2% of our GDP, even allowing for the bizarreness of our recent GDP figures on health. That's the second highest in the OECD, and yet I don't think any of us would agree that our outcomes are particularly good. So why is it like this? I mean, that's really what I think we're here to talk about. I think there's a phenomenal amount of ignorance in the system at hospital management level and within those that have strategic responsibility for the health service. And much of that is driven by the fact that their focus is often on minutiae to fix a particular problem in response to something. So they don't have an overall view. They never actually get their eyes up or head up from this. There's also a culture of denial that we have a problem. So all of you will know that we count trolley figures, but yet the trolley figure counts over the last few years have been systematically adjusted by means of counting them in a different way when the results don't suit. So we have had a situation where things that should have been counted and returned for whatever reason are reclassified. So we do have an issue with the accuracy of those, even though they're currently counted by the INMO. The definition of that is debatable. But even a simple example, a couple of months ago, the Secretary-General of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform said that there was no recruitment crisis in the health service. There is a very serious recruitment crisis in the health service. So either he was misinformed or he was wrong. But either way, there's a problem. There's a general lack of planning, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and there's the impact of local politics. So ultimately what this produces is a lack of a shared vision. And I genuinely appreciate the Minister's commitment to a 10-year plan for health, because I think it's important that as a country, we decide as a country what we need in a health service. The failure to plan is most obvious when we talk about the growth in the number of our population that is elderly, particularly very elderly. And I was at the talks earlier on the older person. And I'm not suggesting the older people are a problem, but I'm saying that our lack of planning for something that was so predictable, and these are the figures from 2006 to the projected 2041 figures, which show not just the 65 to 74, but the even more elderly, the 75 to 84 and the 85 plus, and you can see the dramatic increase in their numbers. Yet there has been no planning in anticipation of this. None that I've certainly seen any evidence of. 1 week, this is the the Tuesday before the general election that happened on a Friday, as you'll know. And this was a story run in our local paper about a threat to the emergency department of Sligo University Hospital as a result of the workings of a review group that I was a member of. I know there is no threat. Sligo is not going to become the next Roscommon. But the fact that this story could be run by a politician a week before the election, that I have no doubt contributed to that person's success in the election. All politics is local, and I do appreciate that for people who get to ministerial rank, they have a constituency to mind, and we've seen the experience of many in the last general election as ministers who lost their seats. So there is a necessity from their perspective to focus on the local, including the local hospital. And the local hospital is always seen as something to fight over. So for many politicians, it's more a source of employment, in my experience, than it is a source of healthcare delivery. And it's also kudos for an area to have a hospital. And I think we've seen that when recently, in fact, when there was discussion about the services for patients with major trauma, which represent less than 1% of the patients who come to an emergency department, there was a furore because a conclusion was drawn, completely inaccurately drawn, that 9 hospitals would lose their emergency departments, as opposed to 9 hospitals wouldn't receive this 1% of their workload. So hospitals and health service locally is a major political lever, and the multi-consultant nature, multi-member constituency nature of our politics, and the fact that there's always somebody trying, whether from your own party or another, trying to climb into your seat, means that there's intense competition for who can be seen to be strongest on the local hospital, even if that means that sensible service reconfigurations don't happen. So these are my views of what the issues are. Some more reasons, in addition to the lack of a shared vision, is that we have a habit so I said we don't plan, but even when we do plan, we tend to produce strategies that become shelfware. So the vision for change in mental health services, the primary care strategy, they're good strategies that would hold muster with any other country's strategy, but the level of implementation has been poor. We also suffer from a capacity, just because somebody else makes an error, that we need to make the same error ourselves. So we don't tend to learn from the experience of others. I'll talk about some of those issues in a minute. Following false gods is part of that, and also unintended consequences of good, which can have a negative impact on other aspects of the health service. So in my own area, this strategy was launched by the third last Minister for Health on the 18th of June 2012. There has been no implementation of it worthy of the name. Ironically, Norway and Denmark have asked could they use it because they want to implement it in their countries. It's a fact. So when I talked about false gods and seeking false gods, one of the perennial issues is about this notion that you can just transfer what happens in hospitals back into primary care. And that's simplistic because it's deemed to be cheaper and deemed to be better without there being much evidence to support it. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second. There's also a notion that if we improve flow, that we'll finally solve all these problems. It's the same as saying that the emergency department trolley problem is a winter problem. It isn't. It's a 12-month-of-the-year problem. And also there's a notion that creating additional doors into the hospital will somehow solve a capacity problem. That doesn't show particularly well, I think, for you. But if you look at, so there's a black line, which is the acute care continuum. On the left is least acute. On the right is most acute. And then there's a line, primary care, which represents the deliverers of most acute care in the system, overwhelmingly. Then there's secondary care, and there's a smaller piece with tertiary and quaternary care. The overlap between primary care and acute secondary care is much less than people appreciate. Now, that's not the same as talking about chronic disease management and seeking that that be delivered to a greater extent in primary care. But when it comes to acute care, the capacity of primary care to address this is less than people seem to appreciate. I think we'd all accept that there are inefficiencies in hospitals, and no doubt Susan will talk about that. But even in those hospitals who have optimised their flow and improved it as much as possible, they're still left with the bedrock issue that there's a capacity problem. And the focus continues to be on flow optimisation, even when that's exhausted. And for many hospitals, there's little further room for improvement without massive spending. So the focus currently is on the creation of additional units, so acute medical assessment units, acute surgical units, acute paediatric assessment units. This is about the creation of more doors. If you have a room and you have 100 chairs in it, and you have 120 people trying to sit on those 120 chairs, it doesn't matter how many doors you create, you're not going to solve the capacity problem. And yet that's what we're being offered currently as a solution. It doesn't work. Phelim spoke eloquently about the role of HICWA, and I would support the importance of HICWA. I think it has been an important tool in getting people to be accountable for what they do. But some of the good that HICWA does has had unintended consequences which are reflected in the hospital system. So, for example, if the number of long-term institutional care beds is reduced as it has been, then there are delays in those patients who do need to go to long-term care getting to long-term care. And that means that patients back up in hospital, and ultimately that's felt most acutely in the emergency department, where people wait on trolleys for longer. It's not fundamentally a bad thing that HICWA has mandated that people who live in long-term care should have appropriate standards for 2016. But what hasn't happened is the investment required to meet those needs. That has not taken place. At this stage, and I'm nearly finished, there is a fundamental lack of trust within the healthcare service. Those that have retired, there was an interesting discussion about retirement earlier, but anybody who has the opportunity to retire in the HSE retires. Even people who don't have the opportunity to retire in the HSE retire. And that's because the environment is so difficult for people and they feel so helpless in it. And, stress and burnout are when you're involved in a situation where you have no control over it. Many of the relationships have broken down irretrievably. So the relationship, if you like, between management and employees is poor and getting poorer. Many of the problems that should be solved in other fora end up being solved, or not even solved, but end up going down the route of industrial relations fora. So if you take the emergency department nurses dispute, which was about a couple of things. One was the extent of the overcrowding. Two is the level of staff shortages made worse by the hemorrhage of nurses from emergency departments. This ended up in an industrial relations forum, which is a completely inappropriate place to deal with healthcare issues. We also function without accurate information. So at a time in which the closure of Roscommon's emergency department was being debated, Roscommon was supposedly seeing 25,000 patients. The figure was about 12, but the return said 25,000, and there are many other examples around the country of inflated or differently calculated figures, I'll put it that way, that have had the effect of allowing us to plan based on spurious figures. And some of this is about the lack of ICT, some of this is about the lack of standardised definitions. In some cases, the definitions exist, but people choose to ignore them, or they're asked by different elements of the HSE to report in different ways on different aspects of it, and therefore end up being confused and just report the lot. So there's an enormous amount. You couldn't run a corner shop in the way that this is run. But this is the basis on which we plan. There are vested interests, and no doubt Susan is going to do this some justice later on, and those vested interests, as I said, have become more adversarial and probably less interested in a sort of collegiate view of how the problems should be solved. And there's an overwhelming focus on minutiae. I mean, if you saw the number of meetings that have taken place in our hospital recently about the fact that we've had a slight headcount rise, rather than the focus on, what are they there to do and what services do we need to provide, I mean, this is, in my view, is entirely pathological. So I welcome Minister Harris's commitment to a 10-year plan, but I think we need to appreciate that there are a number of underlying issues which, if we don't address, then we will not be able to agree a way forward, and we will end up having a plan which isn't implemented, or a plan which people don't feel that they're a part of. I look forward to the debate later on.